It found its way into my life after the divorce. Not loud or sudden, but like the kind of silence that only settles in when the noise has long gone. At 42, I was often told I looked great for my age, though it always came with that tone people use when they aren't sure if they're complimenting or consoling. My name is Claire. I lived alone in a quiet suburb just outside Asheville, North Carolina. Mornings by the mountains were soft and golden, but nights could stretch like shadows, longer than I wanted to admit. My son, Noah, 24, was the one piece of familiarity that grounded me, even though he no longer lived here. He had a position at a firm in Chicago and only came home for quick weekends. But now, thanks to some office remodeling and an expired lease, he needed a place to stay for a few weeks. The stillness of the house had always seemed manageable until it wasn't. He arrived on a warm August evening, just as the sunlight kissed the tops of the trees. I was on the porch with tea in hand when I heard the gravel crunch beneath his tires. He stepped out with that same lopsided grin he'd had since he was little, arms open wide. When he hugged me, something in his hold felt heavier, like he hadn't let himself exhale in months. I held on longer than I meant to. That night, we cooked dinner together. It was surprisingly effortless, our movements slipping into sync like years hadn't passed. We bumped elbows, teased each other over pasta measurements, and for the first time in ages, the kitchen was filled with real laughter. Something shifted, not in him, but in me. I started noticing how grown he'd become, how differently he carried himself now, how he paused when reading something, biting his lip in the same way he had as a child. But there was wisdom behind it now. Depth. I wasn't looking at a boy anymore. I was watching a man find his way. And in that awareness came something else. A quiet, painful realization of just how long it had been since I'd let myself truly feel anything for anyone. The loneliness didn't arrive with drama. It crept in through little things, his footsteps down the hall, the sound of the faucet late at night, the echo of my own voice in a house that used to be full. One evening, we watched an old movie I hadn't seen in decades. Noah poured us each a glass of wine, the soft clink of glasses breaking the hum of cicadas outside. Midway through the film, he turned to say something, just a comment, but we locked eyes for a second longer than usual. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, brow creased. "Yeah," I said, offering a smile. But something inside me ached. Not for him, but for time, for youth, for something unspoken I hadn't let myself acknowledge. Later that night, I stood in front of my wardrobe, fingertips grazing the fabric of an old navy silk robe. It was something I used to wear on nights when I wanted to feel like myself, before the marriage wore down, before the weight of routine dulled everything. I slipped it on, curled my hair gently, and spritzed the perfume that once reminded me I was still here. Noah was lying on his bed with a book, hair tousled, one leg bent. He looked peaceful, his features calm. When I leaned against the doorway, he looked up. His gaze flicked briefly toward the robe, more out of surprise than anything, and then back to my face. "How's the book?" I asked. "It's good," he said. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. He scooted over, and I perched beside him. My eyes scanned the lines of the page, though I wasn't really reading. "You've been tense lately," I said quietly. "I notice these things." He chuckled, lowering the book. "Too many hours at a desk, I guess." "Lie down," I offered lightly. "Just a minute. Let me help." Without argument, he turned over onto his stomach. I knelt beside the bed, adjusting the robe around my knees. My hands hovered for a moment, then rested gently between his shoulder blades. I moved slowly, just as I had years ago when he was younger, firm, calming pressure. His body softened almost immediately beneath my palms. "You carry too much," I whispered. "Someone has to," he murmured. "Especially for you." I paused. Not for long. Just long enough to feel the truth of his words. I continued the motion, slow and rhythmic, tracing the lines of his tension and releasing them one by one. Neither of us said anything more. Just quiet breathing and the hush of a summer storm beginning outside. The air was thick, warm, and oddly comforting. Eventually, I lifted my hands. He turned his head slightly, eyes soft and grateful. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. There was something there, something not said. I smiled softly and brushed a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "Any time," I murmured. I left the room with my heart thudding, unsure where the line had blurred, only that it had, and we were no longer standing where we started. That night, sleep kept its distance. Long after leaving his room, my palms still tingled with leftover warmth. I lay in bed, the sheets twisted around me, the ceiling fan humming quietly above, useless against the storm that churned inside. I turned again and again, seeking calm that refused to settle. This wasn't the shape I imagined my life would take. I was meant to be a guide, a steady hand, not someone lying awake, tracing the sound of footfalls in the hallway or memorizing the shape of a voice calling my name. But loneliness does that. It wears down the edges of roles we think are permanent. And mine were fraying thread by thread. By morning, I didn't have clarity. But I had made a decision. The light spilled gold through the window, like a whispered invitation. I opened the closet, reached for the old red swimsuit, the one with the open back and soft fabric that remembered a different time, and slid it on. Over it, I tied a robe loose around my waist and packed a bag in quiet rhythm, fresh berries, a chilled bottle of water, a glass vial of orange blossom oil, and a velvet pouch that hadn't seen daylight in years. I didn't expect to need it, but I packed it anyway. The lake was 15 minutes down an overgrown trail, a hidden inlet that locals passed by without noticing. He and I had come here years ago, before life scattered us across cities and years. I hadn't returned since the divorce. But something about today pulled me back. When I reached the kitchen, he appeared at the top of the stairs. Hair still tousled, shirt half-buttoned, eyes soft with sleep. His gaze caught on me for a beat too long before he looked away. "You're up early," he said, voice still thick with morning. "I thought I'd head to the lake," I replied, lifting the basket. "Clear my head." He glanced at the window, then back at me. "Want company?" His tone held something unspoken. Not quite casual. Not quite not. "Sure," I said, calm on the outside. But inside, something shifted. The forest trail was fragrant, damp with morning. The breeze skimmed past my calves, warm against my bare skin. And then the lake appeared, quiet and silver between the trees, the surface broken only by the soft breath of wind. I laid my towel near the edge and slipped off my robe, the silk pooling at my ankles. The oil warmed quickly in my palm, its scent folding into the air as I smoothed it along my arms and collarbone. I bit into a berry, sweet and ripe, and let the juice trail down my hand. And then I waited. Not for anything in particular. Just for the feeling that had been following me since last night. The sense that I wasn't the only one feeling it. The sun climbed higher, casting patterns across the lake like fractured gold. I leaned back, eyes half closed, and let the quiet settle around me, until the sound of a twig snapped behind me. "Hey," a voice called gently.
"Noah."
He stepped into the light, framed by leaves and sky. His shorts hung low on his hips, skin sun-warmed, breath just slightly quickened from the walk. He looked at me, then past me, then back again. "Didn't want you getting all the good sun," he said, his grin casual, but something else moved behind his eyes. I offered a small smile. "It's a good day for it." He laid his towel beside mine and sat down with a soft exhale, propping himself back on his arms. I watched the stretch of his shoulders, the slow rhythm of his breath. The space between us felt thick, not uncomfortable, but weighted. Intentional. We said nothing for a while. The lake lapped quietly. The reeds danced. And still I could feel him watching, not openly but often. Like he was waiting for a signal I wasn't sure I knew how to give. "You always tan fast," he said after a moment, his voice lower now, more careful. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. "You remember that?" He nodded, and for a long second, neither of us looked away. Wrapped loosely in my towel, I let the warmth of the afternoon sink into my skin. The lake shimmered, calm and silver, framed by pines that hummed quietly in the breeze. I reached into my bag for my notebook, though I wasn't sure why. I hadn't written in weeks. My fingers brushed the soft edge of the velvet pouch I always carried, a small reminder of who I used to be before life turned quiet. Just as I opened the notebook, the sound of footsteps broke through the stillness. "Hey!" Noah's voice called, light and familiar. I turned. He was stepping through the trees, sunlight catching the edges of his hair. He wore loose gray shorts and carried that effortless air of someone who belonged outdoors. His smile found me before his words did. "You really came early," he said, dropping his towel beside mine. "Didn't want you taking the best spot." I laughed softly, easing the tension that had built from the silence. "You say that like there's bad sun anywhere out here." He sat, stretching his legs, leaning back on his hands. For a while, we didn't speak. The breeze moved across the water, the scent of pine and sun-warmed earth wrapping around us. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt full, almost deliberate, like the pause between notes in a song you both know. "You always find the quiet places," he said finally. "I forget how peaceful this lake is until I come back." I nodded. "It's the only place I've never been in a rush to leave." He looked out across the water. "I get that." Something unspoken lingered in the air, not desire, but recognition. A sense that both of us were searching for something calm, steady, and human. The years had changed us, but in that silence, we understood each other in a way that didn't need words. The day drifted around us, the sun climbing higher, the shadows slipping behind the trees. "Remember that summer we used to come out here all the time? You'd fall asleep in the sun and wake up 2 shades darker." I laughed a little nervously and peeling for days after. He smiled, but his eyes didn't move. "Still, you look good." The compliment hung in the air too long. I said nothing. A beat passed. Then he stood, brushing off his hands. "Think I'll take a swim," he said lightly, but there was something under the ease of his voice. Something we weren't saying. He walked slowly to the water, shoulders loose, step steady. The lake took him in without resistance. I watched him disappear beneath the surface, then re-emerge, slick, shimmering. Every line of him cut by sunlight and water. He floated on his back, eyes closed, hair slipped back, the water cradling him like something sacred, and I, sitting in silence, heart thudding steady and low, knew I couldn't pretend not to see what I saw. My hand moved toward the bag again, slower this time. I traced the edge of the velvet, but I didn't go further. Not yet. Because he wasn't just a presence anymore. He was something I felt deeply. And whatever line we were towing, it had already been crossed in ways neither of us could erase. When Noah returned, he moved deliberately, droplets chasing down his skin, his shorts clinging to his hips. He shook his head as he stepped closer, sending a splash of cold water my way. "Logan," I laughed, raising my arm to shield myself. But the surprise made me smile wider than I meant to. "Payback," he said, grinning for leaving me behind. He sat down again, still catching his breath, the scent of lake water and sunlight clinging to him. I adjusted my towel, smoothing it out, then stretched out on my stomach, resting my chin on folded arms. "I need a favor," I said after a moment, keeping my tone light. "Yeah." His voice came closer. "My back," I said without looking. "The oil's in the bag. I can't reach." There was a pause just long enough to be felt. Then I heard the sound of the bottle uncapping, soft and distinct. And moments later, his touch, gentle, slow, pressed warmth into the small of my back, spreading oil across my skin in even deliberate strokes. He didn't speak, and neither did I. His hands moved slowly, methodically, smoothing the oil across my back, over my shoulders, then gliding downward, lower. When he reached the dip just above my hips, I shifted slightly, letting out a quiet breath, pretending it was nothing more than the relief of touch. You okay? He asked, voice quieter now. Tighter? Ma. I murmured, barely audible. That feels really good. He paused for only a second before continuing, but his touch had changed. Longer, slower, his fingers no longer pretending. There was a hesitance, yes, but also something deliberate in the way he mapped each part of my back, careful not to overstep, yet never quite pulling away. I could feel the effort in him, the self-control, and yet every place he touched left behind a trail of heat I couldn't explain away. When he finished, I turned my head slightly to the side, keeping my voice low and steady.
Your turn. He blinked. What?
You'll burn without it, I said, sitting up slowly, reaching for the oil. Fair is fair. He hesitated just for a second, then nodded once. Silently, turning away from me, his back was warm beneath my hands. I poured the oil into my palm and began smoothing it across his skin, slowly covering the planes of his shoulders, the dip of his spine, the faint curve of his lower back. I felt the muscles beneath tense and shift, and I caught it, that subtle hitch in his breath when my fingers swept just above the band of his shorts. I didn't mean to glance down, but I did. And what I saw confirmed what instinct had already whispered. He hadn't said a word, but his body had. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light that shimmered on his skin. The oil glowed faintly, a sheen of amber across his back. I moved slowly, trying to stay calm, though my pulse beat far too loud in my ears. I wasn't just being gentle. I wasn't just being careful. My touch was filled with everything I hadn't let myself feel until now. When I finished, I capped the bottle with hands that were no longer steady. Noah, still facing away, was motionless. I watched the rise and fall of his shoulders, the curl of his fingers against his thighs. And then, wordlessly, he turned. There was no teasing in his expression now. His eyes found mine open, honest, and full of something deeper than desire. A truth too long buried. That grin he wore earlier was gone. What remained was real.
Raw.
He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. Not hesitant, not searching, but like someone who had held back for far too long and couldn't anymore.
And I let him.
I leaned into him. The sun forgotten. The warmth between us far greater. Our bodies fit together like a secret finally confessed. Like the answer to a question we'd both been too afraid to ask. Breath and heartbeat, silence and closeness. Nothing else remained.
We didn't speak.
We didn't need to. His heartbeat pulsed against mine, steady and deep. We stood there entwined, letting the moment hold us. His hands moved slowly along my back, not exploring, just holding, just feeling, just being. And there it was, the rhythm, that deep, steady hum between two people who finally stopped pretending. The way his body swayed against mine, subtle and slow, the recognition of something long denied. This wasn't a moment we had planned. This was a culmination, a quiet surrender to the truth we'd both kept in the shadows. And in that stillness, under the glow of a fading sun, it was only us, only this. We remained locked in that embrace until the breeze began to cool, the shadows stretching longer. The sun was lower now, but the warmth between us hadn't faded, not even close. Logan eased back slightly, his hands resting on my hips. He glanced down briefly, then met my eyes again with a half smile. Soft, unguarded. Do you have any water? He asked. The simplicity of it nearly made me laugh. I nodded, breath catching in my throat. In my bag, I said, motioning toward the pine tree's shade where I tucked it earlier. He walked over to it, kneeling beside the basket, lifting the towel that covered the contents. And then I remembered. I watched helplessly as his hand brushed the velvet pouch beneath the folded cloth and fruit. His fingers paused, lifted it slightly, and he looked at me. There was no surprise in his eyes. No confusion, just understanding, a quiet recognition. No words needed. I felt a rush of heat climb to my cheeks, but I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I held his gaze and let the silence speak for itself. It didn't need to be explained. It already was. He gently placed it back where it had been, stood, and came toward me again. His voice was low, calm. "If you came here to unwind," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek, "then lie down. Let me take care of you this time." His fingers touched the curve of my back, light and inviting. And without a word, I laid back onto the towel, my heart pounding softly beneath me, matching the rhythm of the ground. He knelt beside me, his hands warm, sure, smoothing oil into my shoulders, my back, the space between us vanishing with each touch. But before I could speak, before I could turn to meet his gaze, he leaned down slowly, deliberately, and he kissed me. Not in a rush, not in confusion, but with intention. His lips against mine felt like everything I had resisted and everything I had needed. A gentle fall into something inevitable, something forbidden and sacred all at once. I closed my eyes and let it happen, not because I had lost control, but because I had finally stopped pretending. The trees stood still around us. The lake shimmered like a mirror of the sky, and for a moment, we were not mother and son, not figures bound by roles or names, but two people drawn into something deeper than reason could hold. And in that suspended world, we stayed,